Hello and welcome to another session of Careers Beyond Academia, hosted by the Stem Cell Network and Medicine by Design. My name is Fiona Cunningham, and I'm the Director of Research and Training at the Stem Cell Network. I'd like to make a housekeeping note that this webinar will be recorded, and we will be posting this to SCN's YouTube channel in the coming days. So we're thrilled to be co-hosting this series with Medicine by Design. Our goal is to expose as many trainees as possible to different careers that are available after a degree in the life sciences and to start to understand the qualifications and experience necessary to secure that role. Stem Cell Network and Medicine by Design have teamed up to host this series, which has already highlighted a wide variety of careers available after a degree in the life sciences. You can see past Beyond Academia recordings on the Stem Cell Network's YouTube page, and we have new sessions coming out throughout the year. I'm especially excited that we can highlight two experienced and successful women in today's session in honor of International Women's Day of Women and Girls in Science, which just took place yesterday, February 11th. We have added a couple of questions to the Q&A portion of this event to highlight the unique challenges and opportunities for women in science. Stem Cell Network also offers other training events that occur monthly. Please check out our websites and social media for the many other opportunities Stem Cell Network and Medicine by Design offer throughout the year, including workshops, seminars, and symposiums. And don't forget to sign up for our newsletters to be notified of upcoming opportunities. Links to signups are provided on our website. So with that, I have the pleasure of introducing our first speaker. Our first speaker is Zoe Anderson-Jenkins, and she is an Associate Director of Regulatory Affairs of Chemistry, Manufacturing, and Controls at BlueRock Therapeutics. As part of BlueRock's regulatory affairs team, she works cross-functionally on ophthalmic and cardiac stem cell therapy development programs. She has over 10 years experience in the cell and gene therapy space and is passionate about the promise of these regenerative medicines in shaping the future of healthcare. So with that, I'll kick it over to you to share your screen and take us through your career trajectory.
All right, thanks very much, Fiona. I just wanted to start by saying a huge thank you to the Stem Cell Network and Medicine by Design for inviting us here to speak. I think this Careers Beyond Academia initiative is really brilliant, and I'm really thrilled to be a part of it. So with that, I'm Zoe Anderson-Jenkins, and as she mentioned, I'm an Associate Director of Regulatory Affairs CMC at BlueRock Therapeutics. So Fiona kind of mentioned this, but I wanted to jump right in and answer the question that I always get right off the bat, which is, what does CMC stand for? Unfortunately, it's a bit of a long-winded answer. CMC stands for Chemistry, Manufacturing, and Controls, which is a bit of a misnomer in the regenerative medicine space. So basically, this comes from in typical drug development, meaning small molecule drug development, chemistry is pretty much synonymous with manufacturing. So if you think Tylenol, for example, the manufacturing process would be chemically synthesizing acetaminophen. Obviously, in regenerative medicine, we're making cells or genes, and so typically there's no chemistry involved in the same sense. But this CMC misnomer still is very persistent throughout the industry. It's used by health authorities, it's used by biotechs. There's kind of a running joke in the industry that the first C in our case should stand for cells manufacturing and controls would make a lot more sense and make kind of explaining what we do a lot easier, but unfortunately, that's not what it stands for. So I'm going to jump into kind of an overview of my career timeline. So it started back in 2012 when I got my Bachelor of Science from the University of Guelph, and that was in molecular biology and genetics. When I graduated, I moved to Denmark to do my master's in molecular biomedicine at the University of Copenhagen. And during my master's, I did my thesis project on embryonic stem cell differentiation into cardiomyocytes or heart muscle cells. So really, this was my first kind of foray into regenerative medicine and stem cells, and kind of examining at the time, the future promise of these cells as a platform for drug development or as a therapy themselves. When I graduated with my master's, I stayed in Denmark for a couple more years, and I worked as a research associate at a different lab, still at the University of Copenhagen, as a research associate. So in this lab, I was working at an ion channel project. So we were using, this time, induced pluripotent stem cells still differentiating them to cardiomyocytes, and then using those cells as a cellular platform for drug discovery. So small molecule drug discovery for different cardiomyopathies. So kind of right off the bat, moving from this potential therapy to kind of real applications and real world uses for these cells. In 2016, I moved back to Canada, back to Toronto, and joined CCRM, which I think many of you will be familiar with. So that's the Center for Commercialization of Regenerative Medicine. And I worked as a development associate at CCRM for a number of years. So I was working on analytical and process development projects, both kind of proof of concept, more on the academic partnership side, as well as kind of partnering with more commercial biotechs and doing scale up, scale out analytical development for kind of real world commercial applications. In 2019, I moved to AvroBio. I don't think AvroBio is around anymore, but it was a clinical stage gene therapy company. And this was kind of my first real pivot towards regulatory affairs. So I actually joined Avro as a technical writer. So I started out really working on kind of technical reports, really source documents for regulatory submissions. And then I started very quickly kind of partnering directly with regulatory colleagues at Avro and writing the regulatory submissions from the technical and the CMC and the manufacturing side. So as we were doing that, it kind of carved out a department of regulatory CMC and roles in the regulatory CMC department at Avro as it grew. Which brings us to today. Since 2022, I've been at BlueRock Therapeutics, and BlueRock's a clinical stage stem cell therapy company. So we have quite an extensive pipeline at BlueRock, but I wanted to highlight kind of two of the things that I've worked on since I joined. The first is their cardiac program. So that's stem cell-based therapies for cardiac diseases, which it was kind of a nice full circle moment coming from my master's in Denmark and the work I did there. I've also had the opportunity to work on the ophthalmic programs there. And we just had an investigational new drug application approved last summer. So we're in the process of starting up a trial for primary photoreceptor disease and hoping to start treating patients within the next couple of months. So I kind of alluded to what I do in a sentence when I was explaining CMC, but essentially regulatory CMC deals with the manufacturing and the quality side of regulatory affairs. So in practice, that means that we're supporting manufacturing teams in their understanding and in navigating any regulatory requirements from that end as the program or the therapy moves throughout drug development. In terms of background, I think there's kind of two main ways that I've seen people get into Reg CMC. There's the technical side, which is kind of how I did it. So you see a technical degree, a master's or a PhD, sometimes a bachelor's degree in some sort of cell and gene therapy related field, molecular cellular biology, biochemical engineering, something along those lines. Or I've also seen a lot of colleagues who have come into Reg CMC from the regulatory strategy side, which you'll hear more about when Tracy speaks, and just gaining experience. Maybe they were covering Reg CMC because they didn't have a Reg CMC colleague. So they were working directly with the SMEs on the technical side and just learned a lot about CMC and the technical aspects of cell and gene therapy on the job, and then moved over that way. In terms of key skills, I think I've harped on the technical know-how quite a bit. I do think that that's one of the most important parts. I think it's really important in this role to be able to speak science and have that literacy. But in terms of soft skills, I think problem solving and kind of analytical thinking is a huge one. Technical writing and sort of scientific communication, again, really big. And there's always an aspect of project management. Every health authority submission is essentially a huge project with many different stakeholders and a lot of different people on the technical and regulatory side. So there's a little bit of cat herding and project management involved as well. In terms of other careers that I considered, I think I was kind of on the track for process and analytical development scientist at the beginning of my career. So obviously I considered that. I was always interested more in kind of the translation part, the scientific communication part. And so medical writing was something I was interested in, as well as genetic counseling as well when I was back in my bachelor's. Day to day, I think in regulatory, you're always kind of working towards the next regulatory submission, whether that's, a submission or a preparation for a meeting with a regulatory agency. So there's always a big project kind of looming in the distance to get ready for. So day to day, that looks a lot like project management, planning, timelines, a lot of writing and or document management. And then kind of overarching all the time, there's a low level of strategic guidance and regulatory research, looking into precedents, basically problem solving. Things are constantly coming up, challenges are arising on the manufacturing side. And it's really our job to advise the manufacturing teams on how to meet the regulatory goals and how to advise the regulatory teams to understand the technical challenges that the CMC is facing and how that might impact the business and regulatory milestones. So, I mean, hopefully I've already captured a little bit kind of why I think my role is important, but I wanted to highlight, I think in general, regulatory affairs is really important in biotech, because essentially the regulatory milestones I really see as kind of like the pillars of drug development, as a drug goes through development towards commercialization, which is the end goal of these biotechs. Reg CMC, I think, is important specifically because essentially manufacturing of cell and gene therapies is hard. It's very complex, it's very technical, and I think that it's important to have someone who can kind of translate the business needs and the regulatory goals and speak the scientific language on the CMC and manufacturing side. In terms of challenges, I feel like I say this one a lot, and every time I say it, it becomes less and less true. But regenerative medicine is still a relatively new field. And what I mean by that is in the grand scheme of drug development, and in the history of these health authorities, there just isn't a lot of experience. There isn't a lot of approved products in this space. And even the ones that are approved, they, might not have had the same challenges that would come up in your process, because every process is different and they're very complex and technical. So basically the challenge is navigating a lot of gray as opposed to black and white that might be more common in like a small molecule drug development scenario. For future career trajectory, I really see Reg CMC as kind of a big ocean in this respect. I think there's upward mobility in terms of managing teams and things like that, but I'm really interested right now in kind of just exploring other opportunities within Reg CMC. So different types of therapies, different types of clinical indications, those are kind of endless, right? Personally, my career is kind of focused on earlier stage drug development. So at some point, I would like to also get some experience doing later stage development, marketing applications, post-marketing applications, things like that. And of course, there's always global drug development experience. So in getting to interact or have experience with countries around the world and seeing how their health authorities might have nuances in how they regulate drugs and drug development. So for career planning, the first and foremost I would say is use your network. I know that's an easy one to say, and I mean this not so much in reach out to people on LinkedIn or post on LinkedIn, but more look around you in your labs and in your previous labs and people that you work with who can vouch for your intelligence and your work ethic and your way of thinking, and really use them to see if they have any opportunities and can vouch for you. That's kind of how I got my first kind of pivot into technical writing, and I'm really, really grateful for that. So I'm a big proponent of that one. In terms of kind of hard skills and things that you can point to help you make that transition, I would say look for any sort of technical writing experience you can get, whether that's a blog, whether that's manuscript writing, whether that's grant writing. I put in here a plug for the Signals blog, which I think is co-run with Stem Cell Network and CCRM. And I think it's still running. I should have checked this. But essentially, it's a stem cell blog that's run and is always looking for external contributors. And that's a really good way to potentially kind of exercise that technical writing muscle. If you've got the opportunity to work in a lab or work at a company on the technical side where the company or the lab is having interactions with health authorities and you can raise your hand and get any sort of exposure to those documents, that is a really, really invaluable avenue to kind of get into this. I think, even if it's just reading previously submitted documents, that's the kind of number one way to familiarize yourself with regulatory writing and what kind of rises to the level of what would be included in a regulatory submission. And it's really, really valuable. That's me. Thank you so much for listening.
Great, thank you. That's really interesting. One quick note to the members of our audience, please do use the Q&A and you can post questions. And also, if you see a question that you like, feel free to upvote it, and we can put those questions to our guests at the end of the session when we open up the session. So I guess we can start with our second speaker now. And our second speaker is Tracy Porter. She is a regulatory affairs professional with over 20 years experience spanning the generic, consulting, and innovative sectors. Tracy is currently the head of regulatory affairs at Vertex Pharmaceuticals Canada, where she oversees the development, registration, and compliance of Vertex products in Canada. So thank you very much, Tracy, and over to you.
Thank you, Fiona. And I'd like to echo Zoe's comments. Thank you so much for having me. I think this is a great initiative, and I'm looking forward to sharing. And hopefully you can see my slides okay and hear me okay. Yep, okay,
You're all set.
Perfect. So as Zoe mentioned, I work at Vertex Pharmaceuticals at the Canadian affiliate. I lead the regulatory affairs department here. And my title is Associate Director, Regulatory Strategy. So as Zoe alluded to, there's sort of different components or subgroups within regulatory affairs. And so I'm based more on the strategy side, and I'll explain a little bit about that as I go on. I would say my sort of educational pathway or journey was not very conventional. And I'll share a little bit about that in my next slide. So I'm going way back here to 1998 to start off with. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do in high school. I was floundering. I was one of those kids, and knew I liked science, thought I wanted to do more of the practical hands-on sort of work. So I enrolled in a diploma program at Seneca College in biotechnology. And through that, I was fortunate. I had a co-op placement with Department of National Defense, and that was an 18-month placement. It was supposed to be 4 months, kept getting extended. And during that time, I worked in labs. And something I thought I would enjoy, I found out quickly I did not enjoy. So realized I wanted to pivot in terms of my sort of career planning. And at that time, Seneca College had brought out a fairly new program. I think it was a couple of years old at that point, in regulatory affairs. And I read a little bit about it. It sounded interesting. I had understood graduates were doing well. So I enrolled in that program. That also had a co-op placement. And I worked at a company known as Gen Pharm, which is no longer around. It became Mylan, and since then has become Viatris. And for any of you that follow pharmaceutical industry, you'll see that's very common. Companies are bought, renamed, purchased all the time. So that's what happened at that company. I was there for about 12 years. And during my time there, I realized very quickly that while I thought my college education was fantastic, I really think I learned a lot. It was great. It wasn't going to really get me to where I wanted to go. So I enrolled at University of Waterloo. I got my Bachelor of Science while I was working. So that was in 2008. Back to actual working. I left Mylan at that time at 2015, and I joined a consulting company known as Intrinsic. So I consulted for various companies, from small startups to big pharma if they just needed some help. And then from there, I went to Takeda Canada Inc. As a senior manager, and I've been at Vertex since 2022. So in terms of typical background, I would say minimum BSc, but formal education in regulatory affairs is certainly very helpful. And like Fiona said, or Zoe said, sorry, graduate degree certainly preferred. The potential salary range for someone starting out is probably about $75,000 a year, depending on the role. And what I do in a sentence is really support development and registration of products in Canada, and then ensure the compliance of our marketed products. Key skills, which I think a couple of these Zoe also mentioned, communication. I would say that's number one. Critical thinking, attention to detail, ability to handle pressure, multitask and collaborate with others. I consider, like I mentioned at the beginning, I considered a laboratory technician. The other area I was looking at was bioinformatics. And fortunately for me, I did an informational interview with somebody in that field and quickly found out that was not for me as well. So there's lots of activities listed here. I would say my most important one, the one I consider most important, is really the company contact with Health Canada and the primary liaison. So if they're sending something to us for one of our products, if they have a general question, if they're looking for pipeline updates, that kind of thing, those requests would come to me. Second, devising the strategy for Canadian submissions. So this is where that strategic piece comes into play, and looking at what is our data package, what kind of pathways, regulatory filing pathways are available to us, which ones would make the most sense, when do we want to meet with Health Canada, when do we want to file, that kind of thing. And then preparing and reviewing the content for those filings. I also review promotional, which is a little bit of a misnomer because you can't promote pharmaceutical products in Canada to the general public, but there are some commercial sort of activities that I review, and then non-promotional materials as well for accuracy and compliance. I'll assess changes for marketed products and then provide guidance to the global team. So for example, my counterpart or my team members like Zoe on the CMC team when they're looking at changes. I also keep abreast of landscape changes, which do happen. We do get new regulations coming into effect. We also get consultations from Health Canada when they're thinking of making changes. So I try to stay up to speed on all of those, providing updates to leadership teams, supporting our market access team for their health technology assessment reimbursement submissions. So those come after we get Health Canada approval typically. And then I participate in global regulatory meetings, and I also participate in industry forums. So I think the role of regulatory is important for lots of reasons, but from my perspective, I really appreciate the fact that I can have a direct impact on patients. So there can be situations where patients don't have any, products for their particular disease or condition, and by driving those forward, I can, hopefully help make an impact to get those products to patients. I enjoy my role, I think because it encompasses lots of different areas. So there's obviously the scientific piece, there's the strategic planning, there's legal considerations, because everything we do really comes from the regulations. And then there's some aspect of business insight, because you're trying to match kind of the regulatory priorities with business priorities. So it's kind of a nice package of lots of different areas. Challenges, timelines, multiple competing priorities, and then prioritization of Canada within global landscape. We're a little itty bitty country, and there's much bigger countries than us. So I really, try to always remind everybody about Canada and not to forget about us. And then in terms of future career opportunities, from what I've seen, really growth within regulatory affairs. And that includes global roles, potential to lead multiple departments. So depending on the way companies are structured, sometimes there can be a combined regulatory affairs and quality assurance department. Some have a scientific affairs department, which may also include other functions. And then also opportunities to work in other departments. I've seen people, for example, move to government affairs. I have a lot of advice on here, so maybe I'll just quickly highlight a couple. I think what I found over the years is it's best just to take every opportunity to learn. Like I say here, anytime, anywhere, and from anyone. Sometimes you'll be surprised what situations you find yourself in where you can learn the most, or from somebody who you may not have realized has a lot of knowledge. So I think for me, I've tried to absorb as much information from others along the way, and I think that's been really helpful. The communication skills, like we've talked about, it's very important when you're communicating, complex information to people who may not be familiar with it. If you can distill it and make it concise and easy to understand, that's a great skill to have. Another one, maybe just quickly to mention, is that if you're familiar with the Canadian healthcare system and all the various levels, you'll know that it's very complex. We have a lot of steps after regulatory approval that have to happen. And so I think the more familiar you are with all of that, the more valuable you can be to a company. And then informational interviews that, like I said, I did one of those along the way, and it quickly informed my decision. So it was great for me. And then just some industry groups there I've mentioned that also have, they have conferences, meetings, and like I said, you can get sometimes some inside information, inside tips, and you can also use those to network. So this is just sort of a image of what we discussed, that regulatory affairs combines, or sorry, is I guess divided into lots of different groups. So you have strategy, you have the CMC that Zoe spoke about. You also have different branches here: labeling, advertising, promotion, operations. It's quite a large group. And then my final thought, as somebody once told me, and this is a true story, if you enjoy filling out forms and doing your taxes, regulatory affairs might be for you. And that's all for me. Thank you very much.
That's great. Thank you. And thanks to everybody who's put questions into the chat. I really appreciate it.